We are excited to introduce our visionary keynote speaker, Alison Fragale, professor at UNC Kenan-Flagler Business School and best-selling author of Likeable Badass, How Women Get the Success They Deserve. A leading organizational psychologist, Alison combines cutting-edge behavioral science with real-world insight to help women elevate their status, strengthen influence, and succeed in their careers. Her research on negotiation and leadership has been featured in top academic journals and national media, including the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times. Please join me in welcoming Alison Fragale to the stage, along with our moderators, Drs. Erica Bisson and Alpesh Patel.
Excellent. I'm really excited for this session with Dr. Alison Fragale. Her research on status, power, and influence feels especially relevant to the work we do every day. As she puts it, people respecting you comes from two places: them seeing you as a capable person and as someone who cares about other people than themselves. Today, we'll dig in what that looks like for spine surgeons from the operating room to the C-suite. Welcome, Alison.
Thank you for having me.
I'm going to start off with a question. It's a bit of a long one. Dr. Fragale, spine surgery requires seamless coordination between orthopedic surgeons, neurosurgeons, anesthesiologists, nurses, and techs, often with strong personalities and hierarchical structures. Your research shows that having power without status or status without power creates workplace dysfunction. How do these dynamics play out in a high-stakes surgical environment, and what should we as spine surgeons understand about navigating that imbalance?
Yeah, absolutely. So power and status are things I spent a lot of time studying. Power is basically being in charge, and status is being respected. And what we find in the one particular combo that ends up being really problematic is being in charge and not being respected. So having power without having status. And so we've been trained to seek power for so long. But if we have it and we don't have the corresponding respect, we see a lot of bad things start to happen. And the one category that I've spent a lot of time looking at is what I call incivility. So these are low-lying forms of deviance that aren't enough to get anyone in trouble, but actually really can create a variety of issues to disrupting the workflow, patient safety, all of these things. Meaning that if you're outside the operating room, or you send an email, someone could respond in 5 minutes, they could respond in 10 minutes, they could respond in an hour, they could respond in 12 hours. Those might all be completely appropriate for the context, but how quickly do people want to answer your questions when you ask them? How much information do they want to give you? Do they want to tell you only what's required, or would they hold back? If they have some inside information, would they come and tell you first? Even how quickly someone might physically move when you ask them to do something can all be affected by, you're in charge, but I don't really respect you. And so one of the things I do is try to help educate people on thinking about respect as a really important variable that has to go along with the power that we hold, because when we hold power and we're not respected, people will find all kinds of ways to push back on us. It's going to make our life worse, but also in the life and death work that you have, right? It can have really catastrophic consequences.
So, thanks, Alison, for being here.
Of course.
So, I'm going to pivot off of what you just mentioned about the life and death consequences, because it brings up, I think, a sticky point for us as surgeons, and that's having difficult conversations with patients and families. So, as spine surgeons, we are oftentimes delivering quite devastating news, things like paralysis, failed surgeries, disability, pain. And you've had a lot of research on powerful communication that suggests there are ways to maintain authority while also showing vulnerability and the advantages that combination can bring. So how do you think we as surgeons should approach those conversations to maintain trust and influence while acknowledging uncertainty and limitations? And maybe a corollary is, what do you think the biggest mistakes people may make, professionals in this situation may make?
Yeah, absolutely. So the basic idea is, if you want to be influential in this context or any other, you cannot be influential if your audience does not respect you. And so that's, being respected is foundational. We don't listen to anybody we don't respect. No one else does either. And the two elements that lead to someone respecting you is they have to believe you know what you're talking about, they have to believe you're competent, and they have to believe you care about them. So I know you have teenagers, I have teenagers, I think about parenting, many people have kids. If your kids don't think you know what you're talking about, they won't listen. If they think you don't have their best interests at heart, they won't listen. You need both of those things to be true. It's no different psychologically when you change the relationship. So if you're talking to a patient, they have to believe both things are true. Now, you have a field, right, where competence is paramount, right? And I mean, people literally like me would use brain surgeon as a metaphor for being, right, highly competent. And so we spend so much time thinking about that. It's really important to think about the other element too, which is the caring piece. And so the mistake that human beings make, not just surgeons or physicians, is there's a tendency, and it has a long name, like you guys have lots of long names and acronyms, we do too, compensatory impression management. It means that when you want to show up really strong on one dimension, we often compensate by pulling back on the other dimension. So if I need to show up as really competent, the tendency that human beings have is to say, I'm going to get less nice, I'm going to be less friendly, and I'm going to be more serious. In interviews, people often do this, right? They're like, this is my job to show I'm competent. So if you're in a patient communication situation and you think, I need to convey information, I need to show my competence, I need to get them to listen to me, it's natural to want to lean into that dimension really hard and perhaps unintentionally be pulling back on the caring dimension, but your audience is paying attention to both. So what I encourage people to think about is how to think about ways to lean into that second dimension when you're communicating with people, because they're both equally important for being able to have influence. And particularly, we have a very, like if you work in the United States, it's a pretty litigious country. There's a lot of things to be worried about, and that often tends people to pull back as well. So to think about ways that you can lean into caring, not at the expense of your competence, but as a complement to your competence.
I love that. We talked this morning about what success looks like, what quality looks like from our lens, but more importantly, from our patient's lens. So I think thinking about what you just said through our patient's lens and their families is critically important for all of us. Mentorship, another topic Eric Potts talked a lot about this morning, and the importance of mentorship. But there are some pitfalls that we need to make sure we understand deeply when it comes to being a mentor, being a sponsor, and what that looks like to our mentees. So traditional surgical mentorship often involves a dominant attending and a subordinate trainee, a model that can perpetuate power imbalance and even abusive behavior. I think Eric said he just got attention to say, don't go into medicine. How should spine surgery training programs reimagine mentorship relationships to develop powerful, confident surgeons while maintaining necessary hierarchy and accountability?
Yeah, great question. So first, I've done a lot of research on just the existence of hierarchy, and the United States is a more egalitarian society than some higher power distance cultures, but hierarchy actually is a really good thing. So groups perform better of all kinds, right? Regardless of the task, when you actually give them a hierarchy. And people actually like it more. People like understanding where they fall and who reports to whom. So hierarchy in itself is a good thing. And so it's not necessarily something we have to minimize or get rid of, but we have to think about how to manage it. One of the things that works really well is when you have hierarchy within a task, but who is in charge across tasks ends up varying. So therefore, you're combining elements of hierarchy and equality. So within any given task, there's a structure. We know who's in charge and who reports to whom, but in the next task, it might shift. Now, when you think about mentorship in surgery, that can't necessarily mean like, I got this surgery, you get the next one, because not everybody is necessarily leading at that level, but there are a lot of other things that need to happen, right, in the course of doing your work where you can think more creatively about who gets to be in charge. So it can either be formally creating opportunities for people who are like lower ranked or earlier in their career to actually lead things. And the key to doing that well is the people who are going to follow, even if those are the higher ranked, higher power people, have to actually take the followership role. So you can start to think about where we can trade off who's leading everything across different tasks. You can take that same idea though and apply it at the individual level. And what I mean by that is one of the things I talk about to people is at all stages of our career or life, everybody should be mentoring and everybody should be mentored. And there's a tendency to think that mentorship is something you receive when you're young and you give when you're old. But that's not that can be true, but we have to think about doing the opposite as well, which is no one is ever too young or too inexperienced to have something to offer. So I think about all kinds of things. I have teenage kids. There's a lot of things they don't do well, but I don't even try to troubleshoot my own computer or my phone problems anymore. I just hand it to them, like, you fix this. And they're like, Mom, you're so dumb. You have a virus. And they do that. Like with my graduate students, right? They often understand how to use AI in research. They understand languages and coding that didn't even exist when I went through graduate school. They use different analytical techniques, all these things. There's opportunities to actually be a learner, and there's opportunities to be a teacher. And so what I say to everybody who's further along in your career is to think about opportunities to seek out the people around you, including people who do not have the same title that you do, and say, you're good at this, could you teach me? And actually one-on-one as an individual learn, right? Allow them to mentor you. If you are younger, speak up, right? To say, hey, there's ways in which I could be helpful here. And people are very willing to get help if you offer something sincerely. So don't wait for someone to ask you or think that you have to be given formal permission to do it. Just start offering those things. And a lot of it happens in this informal, one-on-one level. So I do think that there are structural things that groups can do. So I've done a lot of work over my 20 plus years being an academic, a lot of work in the military, very different organization, but also extremely hierarchical for the same reasons that medicine is hierarchical, which is like you're dealing with life and death situations. And so it's really important. And in a lot of ways, the military does not do reverse mentorship well at all, but in some very small contexts, they do. And so to look for the context where it makes sense. So one that I've always seen, and I always find it's great that they do it, and I can't get it to expand more than this, is particularly in the Air Force where flying is a dominant offensive force. After flight reviews are described as extremely egalitarian in the way that people give feedback to each other. So it does not matter how many stars you have on your chest. If you did something wrong and someone else noticed it, they'll speak up, and the person who outranks will absolutely listen and acknowledge it. And I think there are some parallels there to thinking about post-surgical discussions in which you could formalize those types of things. But I do think it's a mistake to say, hey, I'm going to wait until my organization rolls out some massive mentoring plan that solves the problem, to say you have a lot of power where you sit as a human being to be able to do a lot of things, to be a constant learner and seek out people who know things from anywhere and say, I really value what you do. I would like to learn more from you. You have an opportunity to offer guidance to other people. And so, I sit in the space of organizational psychology, and one of the things we see is that if you work in a terrible organizational culture and you have a great boss, people typically love their job. If you work in a great culture and you have a terrible boss, people hate their job. And what that says to me is that you should never underestimate the power that an individual has, right, to make something good. So I think thinking about what you could do to be able to give voice to people, to allow them to have authority, regardless of what's going on in the organization, is really, really important. And then I think the other thing is also that idea that, that humility that we can always learn. So I will often talk about Atul Gawande's TED Talk, if you haven't seen it. It's called Why Everybody Needs a Coach. And it's basically the story of him inviting a mentor surgeon into his operating room once he was a relatively established surgeon. But he gives an anecdote there, which I think is useful, is if I told you there was an athlete that had 8 coaches, and that's all I said, you would instantly infer that was an elite athlete because, right, no one else is going to have 8 coaches. If I told you there was a surgeon that had 8 coaches, you would wonder why that person hadn't already been fired, right? And so there's a mentality that outside of anything but athletics, being a professional means you no longer need to be coached. And so I think that's just as important piece to remember about the mentoring as offering the guidance, is to put yourself in that learner mode. And when you naturally do that, you will naturally be elevating other people to power and expertise because you're listening to them.
There's so much I learned just there. And I think it dovetails into a conversation that we oftentimes have as leaders within our domains and within our, whether it be national or local domains, which is that, we are inevitably leading teams of people. And we have very, very little formal structure, really little formal education on how to manage teams, right? We live in a world where we're the individual and our success is on the individual level, right? Through college and medical school and residency and beyond. So that's an area that's, I think, a blind spot for many of us, is how to manage teams. So when we think about the teams that we have to work with, they're increasingly across disciplines where we may not have a formal power structure, right? And so how do we succeed in that domain when we have to lead teams and yet may not have formal power?
Yeah, absolutely. So, well, very few people are trained in how to be a leader or run teams. That's why I have a job. So it's job security for me. So that's good. And then the other thing is, we often will be really stressed out when we have to be influential across without authority, right? At the same time, I always say to people, does it really matter? Because if you have the authority, do you really just want to run around all day saying, do as I say because I'm in charge? No one actually wants to have to fall back solely on their positional authority to get things done. We're always trying to bring people along voluntarily. So if you're in a situation where you have to influence across authority lines, I would say it's not really any different than what you're trying to do in the context of direct reporting relationships. You're trying to get people's willing buy-in. And a couple of things, right? One is the two elements to think about the idea that, yes, they have to think you know what you're talking about. So that's the idea, like, do I have a good idea? But also is I'm not just out for myself, that I'm having to convey why I'm doing these things, that I see a benefit for you, I see a benefit for the greater good for the organization, and to not undersell that piece. I think we so often think that we will be influential because we have the best idea, and it's a good idea combined with conveying to the audience that we have their best interests. I think that is really important. And I think the biggest mistake people make when they're trying to be influential is they start too late. So you're really busy, I'm really busy, I got a million things to do. If I don't have to worry about something for a month, that's like a problem for weeks from now, right? I'm not dealing with that today. So now I show up and now it's the biggest fire that I have. And I need you to agree with me. So I'm gonna come in hot and I'm gonna say, okay, here's what's going on, I need you to agree. And I'm hearing about this for the first time and I don't even know what's going on. And I have to get on board all of a sudden, and I might resist or I might have questions. Well, now you're frustrated because we needed this done yesterday. And nobody influences well when they're frustrated. And you certainly don't show up as caring and warm when you're frustrated. And so all of those kind of issues can be resolved if we start earlier. And I mean, by start earlier, I mean doing two things. One is building the relationships before you need them. So if you go out like 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years in your career and you think, like, where do I want to be and whose support do I need to get there? I would tell you start building those relationships today, long before you need to ask people for anything. You're investing in those relationships. They know who you are, all of that. So that's really important, is to start building the relationships long before the influence happens. And the second thing is to start circulating your ideas long before you need people to say yes. So both of those relate to, there's a phenomenon in psychology called mere exposure. It just means familiar things are liked more. So if you have a favorite song on the radio right now, you like it more now than the first time you heard it. With repeated exposure, we start to like things more. That's true of people. So familiar people, even if we just recognize the name, that's why, like, when I go to an event like this, especially if you're like starting out in your career, not everybody knows who you are. It's like, geek out and put the name tag on, introduce yourself with your first and last name. You do that like event after event. People are like, I've heard of that. I'm like, I know who that is. You have to do that, but you also have to start circulating your ideas earlier. So this idea that I have to get my head around something. So I was telling a story that my middle child, it's a very middle child skill, is an excellent negotiator, right? He's learned to figure out how to negotiate his way around the family. And he convinced us a couple Christmases ago to get him this expensive camera that I would have thought there was no way we were going to get him. And in fact, our first reaction was absolutely not. That's the craziest thing I've ever heard. But the beauty was he asked us in October, okay? And it was before his birthday. And I'm like, you're not getting that for your birthday, which he didn't. But no problem. He's got another 6 weeks to keep laying the groundwork. So he keeps coming back, right? Politely. He's not rude. He's not panicked. He's like, this is weeks away, just talking about the camera, chattering away. After a while, my husband and I are like, maybe it seems like he really wants it. It's not really going away. Maybe it's not the worst idea in the world. And we start generating a list of reasons why we could actually make this work and it was a good idea. And he got the camera. Well, it's no different, right? The idea is that people's first reaction to a new idea is that's change. People don't like change. Their first reaction is that can't happen. That's not working. I'm protecting the status quo. But if you give them time, they can overcome their own objections. They can recognize that they can hear your, counter arguments, get their head around it, et cetera. You can figure out what their points of resistance are and come back with a better argument to rebut it. But you need time to do that. So what I tell people is this key of influencing across authority lines is to start a lot sooner than you need to. And I always tell people, like, look 1 month, 6 months, 12 months out of what people you want to say yes to, start shopping those things around now. I don't exclusively talk to women, obviously, but I do talk to a lot of women. And it's an issue that will often come up about your own career path. Like, people will say, I aspire to do something, right? I want to be chair of my department, or I want this role, or I want to have this leadership role in a conference, but not today, but somewhere in the future. And I'm like, that's the best time to be talking about it, when you don't want it, because then you can start to lay the groundwork. That's the song that people are hearing on the radio for the first time. Oh, you see yourself in that role? Okay, well, no, not today, but now, come a couple of years from now, when you are ready, it's not the first time they're hearing about it. So I think we need to do a much better job of that. And it's partly because we're busy, and partly because people don't like to ask people for things or negotiate, that we kick that task off a lot longer than we should.
Yeah. There's a lot of parallels in how we communicate with patients and sharing our ideas with patients.
Yeah.
Right. That I just took away, that, we'll see patients who come to you for your expertise, you share your expertise, and it doesn't land.
Yeah.
Right. And it's unbelievably frustrating. We all feel that frustration of, I can't believe they didn't listen to me.
Yeah.
Right. And we try to have these one-off transactions when really it's not a one-time game, right? It's a repetitive interaction. That's true with the other big source of frustration for many in the room is probably, the administrators that we report to or work for in the hospital. So I just took away a lot there.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because I just got 2 crowns on my teeth. It's like, tell me you're 50 without telling me you're 50. I just did this, but my dentist, which is a new dentist because he took over for the practice, every time I'd see him, he'd do the little check and he's like, not today, but we're going to, at some point we're going to have to talk about those. He probably said that to me for 3 years with no sell, no expectation. And finally I was like, what are we talking about here? Like, after I'd heard it 6 times. And I was like, all right, let's just do it. And I went in and I did it. So that idea of starting early in that communication of anything allows people. So if you do it with a patient, it's like, I'm playing this song for the first time and I'm asking for it to be their favorite song. It's just a very high bar.
Yeah.
I think building off that, Alpesh, you mentioned not only frustration talking to our patients, but that we also have lots of conversations with administrators. Spine surgeons increasingly need to influence healthcare policy, insurance decisions, public health initiatives, and our clinical expertise doesn't automatically translate into this skill set or political or policy influence. What steps do you think we can take as spine surgeons to kind of build our skill set and build our armamentarium in order to be in those conversations with policymakers and administrators?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think one thing is to decide for each individual what role you want to play, right? Some people, I see them over the course of their career, they really want to be front and center in those conversations. And other people want to be influential, but it's not really what they want to be doing day in and day out. So I think about, there are many physicians who end up often, well, I don't know the order, but I see them often after they're already a physician, they'll end up getting their MBA, as people sometimes do, right? And think about combining medicine and business. And I get to see some of their paths, and I can think of one person in particular as an emergency medicine surgeon out of DC, and over time came back, got into business, and then now does a lot of really active stuff like influencing policy and in healthcare. And it's very clear that he likes playing a role where it's front and center. He's dropped most of his clinical work now, and he's really focusing on that. I don't think everybody necessarily aspires to do what he's doing, but I would say if that's the kind of role you'd say eventually, like if I think about a pivot in medicine where at some point I would be doing that, I do think back to the idea of starting early, which is people have to see you that way. They have to see you as a thought leader. And what I would tell people to do, and what he did, is I would be like, that's what I would use your social media for, right? Medicine is something that human beings like me, no matter how educated they are, don't really understand. And what he does a good job of is he demystifies medicine, okay? And people who demystify medicine for the general public, then everybody else who's a policymaker and not a surgeon can understand what they're talking about. And I think it's a really good use of actually, if you have any social presence whatsoever, is to just start as a thought leader in a very low stakes environment. But over time, people start mere exposure, see you time and time again, commenting on policy issues. He'll say, here's why I think this decision was a good one or a bad one, et cetera. So that's one way you could start to use your voice over time in the area of expertise that you have, and that could broaden the scope. Maybe some people would like to then take that thought leadership and really lean into it. For everybody else, they might say, no, I want to be influential, but I'm not really looking to be, the C-SPAN face of medicine or surgery. Then what I would say is it's really important to think about leveraging your network. not everything you want to have influence on has to be done directly by you. So who are the people who are more front and center, who are more already positioned to have influence? You don't have to influence the end audience, you just have to influence them. And that's what I would start to think about as well. We tend to underutilize our second and third degree connections in our relationships. We always think, if I want to influence you, I need to know you. No, I just need to know somebody who can influence you. And I would start to think about that mapping, because you can also stay behind the scenes and be highly influential if you can get to the people who are one step closer to that audience that you want to reach.
Yeah, I think that accepting that the network of people around you is an unbelievable asset for you. It comes back down to appreciating that you need people around you, which I will tell you myself as a surgeon through my training was not really how I was trained. That wasn't the strength that you leaned into, was relying upon other people. But without a doubt, one of the things I took away from my time at Kellogg and getting my MBA was appreciating the power of the people around you. And it's, to your point, it's not the people you know directly, it's who else do you know that might have an idea here, right? And seeking advice and a learning mindset along the way, I think builds influence. The social media tools are interesting, right? Because I'm over 50 as well, and so I feel like I'm feeling aged when I hear people talk about get on social media to be more influential. I was taught that you become influential by putting in the time, putting in the work, showing up, kind of grinding through it, right? But the social media part also is something that I heard loud and clear from what you just said. We have one more question.
Okay.
Do you mind?
No, I don't mind.
Okay. So, and this is a broad challenge now, right? To the entire group here. We are all experts in our domain. We're really thoughtful experts in spine surgery. Someone said earlier that we're a mile deep and an inch wide, right? And we come to meetings like this to dig deeper oftentimes. But hopefully we get the occasional opportunity at a meeting like this to look up, lift our head up out of the sand a little, and get different perspectives. And so you bring a completely different perspective to the conversation today, and yet you're also a scientist, which is always one of the things I've always loved about our conversations. So as you look around this room filled with a lot of high achievers, and you think about what our domain of spine and spine surgery and maybe even within medicine, what could we be doing better, right? What are the biggest blind spots that you think we have with an outsider's lens?
So I don't think it's specific to spine surgery, but what I would say is I'll just classify this as a blind spot to high achieving groups. And that is that one of the things that high achievers do poorly is recognize the contributions of others, because we have such high standards for ourselves, and it leads us to have equally high standards of others, which we should, but to then under-recognize, under-praise. And oftentimes we have this idea of, hey, I expect you to do an excellent job, and your reward for doing an excellent job today is I let you come back and do an excellent job tomorrow. And human beings don't work that way, right? When you experience gratitude, right, from somebody, it's so meaningful. I once wrote to a physician that years after he had seen me, I'd already moved states, but I thought about him often because he made a big difference in my life. And I wrote him a note, and I just wanted to say, like, hey, everything's going really well, and I've never forgotten how good of a job you did taking care of me. And he wrote me back and he said, this is so meaningful. He said something like, often dissatisfaction is much more motivating to patient communication, right?
Yes.
And so,
yeah.
So the point is, what could you do that's a concrete action? One of the things I say to people is, if you did nothing else in your life, I would encourage you to become an evangelical talker-upper of the good things, good work around you that people are doing, okay? Whether that's thanking a physician or thanking a colleague, et cetera. And you don't have to be fake about it, and you don't have to make it your life's work. But what I do is, every time I have a thought in my head, of a positive thought about something, like that doctor just popped into my head and I thought something nice, take the time to put it out there in the world in some way, shape, or form. Talk them up to other people who need to know how great they are, especially if these are people you're mentoring. Tell them to their face, etc. Just take that moment and put it out into the world. Don't let it die in your head. Now, why is that so important, right? One is that it's a very fun way to live. That kind of praise is highly motivating for other people's behavior, but it also turns out to be one of the most strategic things you can do to manage your own brand, because relationships run on reciprocity. So you walk into this hotel and you hold the door open for somebody, they are going to stop and hold the next door open for you, even if they don't know you. That's what happens. You go to lunch with a friend and the friend pays, you're going to make a mental note. I need to pay next time because we need to stay in balance. When you make a habit of talking up people for the authentic good work that they did, their natural instinct when they hear about it through the very efficient grapevine we live in is, I've got to return the favor. That buries in their brain, and they'll naturally start looking for opportunities to elevate you. And so you think about the doors that will open for you in your career. Yes, being an excellent surgeon, but excellent surgeon and, right? People know you, they like you, they seek you out, they want to work with you, all of these things. All of that will happen more if people are talking you up. And one of the most fun, controllable ways to do that is for you to start first. So I always tell people, like, when you have those positive reactions, especially on people on your team and everything, just find a place to put them there out in the world.
I love that. Expressing gratitude is something that is a skill that I've had to learn as an adult, right? And that's wonderful. And really highlighting the achievements of the work we do together. I would say we spend probably 80% to 90% of our time dissecting out when things go wrong. And we spend very little time appreciating when things go well, right? So I think that's something that we can all do, again, Monday, Tuesday, when you're working with your clinical teams, is just talk about how great it is that we get to do these amazing things for patients, right? I think that's a great takeaway.
And it's also really good for performance. So there's studies of basketball teams, that professional and college teams, where they express their gratitude toward other players with like chest bumps and high fives and fist bumps. Those teams actually have better seasons. It's like statistically the difference between making the playoffs and not. I'm not advocating you need to chest bump the people you work with, but expressing gratitude has actually been shown to relate to bottom line performance as well. Yeah.
Excellent. I want to thank you, Dr. Fragale and Alpesh, for this amazing session, and thank all of the speakers this morning. It was a whirlwind of hearing about patients, our successes, our quality, and how we elevate spine surgery.